we have never been better at talking about mental health. We have never had more access to the tools and services of mental health. And yet, when you look at the levels of emotional distress in any modern industrialized society, it keeps going up. The generation has just got into their 20s now, for the first time in recorded history, now looks at their prospects with more pessimism than the generation above them for the first time. And you go, there's something wrong here. Yeah. There's something wrong with this explosion in mental health, but yet this counter explosion of rising distress. And for me, it was about the missing part of the therapy experience or the mental health experience, which is it's people, it's connection, relationships.
Yeah. What else can you say about mental health in 2025? We're talking about Gen Z and mental health.
Yeah, what's happening with Gen Z? So they're the first generation who learned this language as part of the language that they learned about life, right? They learned about ADHD, anxiety, depression, bipolar, all these sort of terms, very popular terms, in really crucial moments, right? So we have a whole generation of kids who have learned this language to help them identify and explain how they feel about themselves. But the problem with that is those words and that language doesn't exist in a vacuum. It has connotations, right? Because those words are very contested and loaded and mean different things to different people. And so what's happening is we have this generation of children who, by the way, weren't doing this in the vacuum, right? The lots of schools and colleges and institutions with the best of intentions were trying to bring this stuff into schools to help children, but sadly have done the opposite, I believe. Because what they were doing is they were diagnosing the normal stages of child development as abnormal and therefore a mental health problem.
Sure.
And there's a very famous study in Canada, of all places, that found that when psychiatrists were kind of like invited into schools to study the difference between boys and girls, and what happened is they looked at all the kids, and what they found is they tended to diagnose lots of kids with attention deficit disorders. And they said this is a real problem in schools, that kids are now really struggling with their attention, this kind of stuff. And then someone else looked at the data and said, well, look at when the kids were born. And the kids with the biggest attention disorders were just younger. Right? You think about an academic year, the kids could be 10, 11, 12 months difference in age. Yeah. And at 5 and 6, that is a massive gap in terms of development, in terms of maturity. And so I think there's been this real tragedy with this idea of diagnosing very normal human experiences with labels that change the people that receive those labels.
My perspective on that, being a teacher on a psych unit where I watched the diagnosing, number one, I saw a lot of great labels for just really bad behavior. Now, I'm not the person to diagnose, but there are some that this is a great way to justify really bad behavior. May or may not be the case. But my issue was, like, our diagnostic and statistic manual. So here in North America, we're the DSM-5. Do you also in the UK use DSM-5, or do you have a different?
We do. It's
becoming
the dominant way that's starting to happen.
But the thing I've been saying to anybody who's going to listen is we don't require ruling out for diagnosing. So, for example, DSM does not require you to rule out anxiety nor childhood trauma to diagnose ADHD or anxiety. You don't have to rule out the trauma or the inattention.
That's it. And the thing about ADHD that I find so interesting that no one seems to be willing to talk about is the symptoms or the sort of the hallmarks of ADHD are also the same hallmarks of traumatic experience. And they can present in people in wildly different ways. Yeah. Yeah. Right? Someone could be so incredibly traumatized but very high functioning at the same time. Yeah. And they would pass all the tests looking for these sorts of things because they're looking for the label, not the experience.
Yeah. I see it over and over again, and we're damaging. I'm not saying that they're not there. I'm not negating that those are accurate diagnoses that can happen, but they are happening a lot on a very broken foundation of a book.
It is a crapshoot, and there's a great English sort of journalist, therapist person that I see as a bit of an aspiring person that I'd like to become. He wrote an incredible book about this idea called Sedated, and it's about how capitalism and mental health kind of colluded to kind of create this sort of pandemic of suffering. He interviewed the founder of the DSM, and he was very remorseful about the work that he ended up doing.
Really?
Yeah, he was, and because he admitted in interview, and it's in his book, that what happened to the DSM and why it started has become so wildly different. It was to guide and inform practitioners rather than to be hard and fast. But one thing that he said in that interview, if you look at all illness in humans, and if you look at the progress in diagnosis, treatment, and recovery, cancer, HIV, any illness really, what you tend to find is the longer we know about it, the more time that goes into it, the better the recovery, right? So you take things like polio. Now apply that same model with mental health, right? We have put more money, more time, more pharmacology, more experts, more clever people into this stuff. So if it's the same medical model, the way we think about mental health, as we think about cancer, why are recovery rates going down?
Right.
Why are we medicating people for way too long, right?
Good point. Yeah.
And I think, and this is the thing that doesn't really get talked about, is we want to use the medical model because mental health came from psychiatry and psychiatry came from medicine, and there's this sort of long shadow of, and if you're interested in the history of psychiatry, it emerged in a formal way in the late 19th century, and the problem it had was no one took it seriously. So out of that comes a kind of whole industry that's trying to prove its worth and prove its value. And so it uses that medical model of authority to say we have correctly diagnosed and observed these conditions in these people. But then what happens is, if you look at the DSM over time, certain things that were in one DSM doesn't turn up in another one. Homosexuality was in DSM-3 but not DSM-4. And those sorts of questions where you go, these are all constructs, not hard and fast diagnoses. Right. But we never tell the people that we're diagnosing that these are just ideas.
I just got to say it. So my dad's just been through cancer, chemotherapy. Yep. He's in remission. Do you know what? There was a formula. It was a set formula. He took these medications. He did this chemotherapy. He did this. It was set. It was A, B, C, D, X, Y, Z, and you're better. It's a nice, compact formula. But with mental health, it is so much more than that. Like your work on connection. And that's not in a pill, but we like the pill. So when we like the pill, it's why then it's not working, because we're veering towards that. It suits our humanity. And it works like that with physical health. But the problem is it can't work like that for mental health. That's
absolutely. And I think it's starting to change. I don't know whether you've read The Myth of Normal by Gabor Mate.
It's over here. I could show it.
There you go. And for anyone who hasn't read the book, it really makes this case, right, that we've historically separated body and mind as two distinct entities.
Yeah.
But they are not.
Yeah.
We cannot separate them. It's impossible. He realized that you can treat an illness, absolutely, and you can get incredible results from treating an illness. But if you treat an illness and you treat the person, and you treat them and they enter into a relationship with you in the process, recovery rates are higher. And what he found astounding was when people go to doctors and say, I have this autoimmune issue, no doctor asks them about what their quality of life is like.
Yeah.
What the stress levels are like, what job they do, how's their home life, and when they do, what you tend to find is people's emotional worlds changed quite radically leading up to these diagnoses.
Right. Yeah.
And it's this thing, and I hope that's the trajectory that we're moving on, where we're finally taking down these walls, where actually you as a person is not really you as a person. It's just a kind of center of gravity for experience, relationships, history, geography, ethnicity, race, and it just gathers around you, and that is you. You're not just an outline of you, so you shouldn't treat you like you are a sealed box.